I just wrapped up a weekend at AKPA, which is an international conference of young people in AA. And I had such a mind blowing experience. I was on the host committee. I've been a member um, in varying degrees of intensity over the last 7 years, um, bidding for that conference to come to Boston, Massachusetts. And I'm on like an emotional roller coaster. Um, I think I've cried like probably 10 times over this weekend. And so I have like a little bit of an emotional hangover since that just ended. But so I'm going to try not to talk about that too much. I'm going to share um, pretty much what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. Um, Basically, what happened was I was, um, a kid from Massachusetts. My parents split up when I was very young. My father wasn't a big part of my life. He is probably could qualify as a member here as well. Um, and we moved around a lot when I was a kid, so I was always the new kid in school, and I always felt uncomfortable, and I was always the class clown, and we didn't have a lot of money, so I always felt um, like less than, and that I didn't belong. And for a long time growing up, humor was kind of my coping mechanism. When I felt uncomfortable, when I wanted people to like me, um, I would do something outrageous and try and get people to laugh. And that was uh, what I would do. And also what I would do to keep people at an arm's length so that they wouldn't get to know me. I have abandonment issues. And like if people don't really get to know me, they don't have to, you know, if they leave, it wasn't a big deal because we weren't close anyway. But anyway, some other childhood traumas. My grandmother, who helped raise me, died when I was very young. Some sexual abuse stuff when I was a kid. Um, so I didn't have like the picture perfect childhood. I had everything I need and a lot of what I wanted. My mom did an amazing job. Um, and and all the stuff that happened to me when I was a kid didn't isn't what made me an alcoholic. I don't think. I think that probably played a part in it, but I think I also have a genetic predisposition to uh, an allergy to alcohol. Just like anybody else born with an allergy to bees or shrimp or milk or whatever it may be. I was born with this allergy, as is described in the doctor's opinion of our basic text that says um, that pretty much sums up says that um, if I introduce alcohol into my system, I can no longer control the effects that it has on me, and that's basically exactly what happened since the first time I drank at around age 14. Um, Once it went in, I didn't know what was going to happen, and for years after that, um, it was a I drank only for the effect. Right? It says we drink solely for the effect. Um, I would drink to get out of myself, to feel comfortable, to be a part of, to feel um, bigger, smarter, sexier, funnier, whatever it was that I felt less than. Alcohol did the trick, and it worked perfectly um, until it stopped working. As the years went on, I had suffered more severe consequences as time went on. When I was 16, I flipped my buddy's truck and got an OUI and lost my license. I, failed out of college solely due to alcohol. I, um, started getting into more and more legal trouble. I hope nobody's offended because I do believe in the singleness of purpose, but um, it also lowered my inhibitions to being introduced to other substances, which are a huge part of my story. So, frankly, I'll put it, I like to drink my booze. I like to sniff my booze. I like to inject my booze in a syringe. I am a dumpster. I will literally I had faith that if you told me something was going to make me feel better if I ingested it in whatever way you suggested, that it would work. Um, and I never thought twice about it. If somebody ever came up to me when I was feeling a certain way and said, "Here, this will make you feel better," I would take it, no questions asked. Um, so, and then I would probably see if I could buy more off of you. But um, that being said, I think they say normal people change their behaviors to suit their goals, and people like myself um, change their goals to suit their behaviors or my lifestyle. And that's basically what kept happening. Everybody always used to say, "Oh, you're such a good kid. You have so much potential. You can do whatever you want." Um, and I could, and I believe that. But um, I kept, if I wasn't really really good at something without very much effort, I wouldn't do it. So going off to college and trying to get into the computer science community was really hard, and at least for me, and I didn't want to stick around with it. So drinking what became my college career, and so on and so forth. You could go right down the line. If I wasn't good at it, you better believe I wasn't going to stick around to try and get good at it. But there's, you know, drinking came pretty naturally. I was very good at it right from the beginning, and and so coming back to Cape Cod, it's kind of a bipolar community. We're very manic in the summertime and very depressed in the wintertime. Um, there's always a really good excuse to get shit faced, and eventually that led me to a place where um, like my mother was in Florida taking care of my dying grandfather, and while she was away, I pretty much stole every single thing of value that wasn't bolted down. Um, I wasn't above stealing money out of my little sister's piggy bank, stealing um, money, stealing the bank card and going to an ATM and withdrawing money from my parents' account. I wasn't above stealing my mom's jewelry and pawning it. It was a complete spiritual loss of values, things that I would have never ever done um, if I wasn't suffering from the mental compulsion and um, the mental obsession and the physical compulsion to continue um, to drink. So, um, the jig was up back in um, January of 2009. Like I said, my sobriety date is in 2013. So 2009 is when the shit hit the fan for me, and I went off to get my first taste of this fellowship. I went to a detox for the first time. I went to a holding facility waiting to get into a long-term 6-month halfway house program. And I said yes because I had nowhere else to go. I had nowhere else to turn. All my friends I disconnected from. My family, there was nobody in my family that didn't know what was happening. Um, and so off I went, and things started to get better for me slowly but surely. I met a man in that detox later when I was in the halfway house. He strolled up, and he had a book in his hands, and he looked happy, and he looked okay. And I was like, "Hey man, I remember you from detox." And he's like, "Yeah, hey, how you been?" And at this point, I was in. I identified a little bit more in another fellowship, and I had gotten a sponsor. And because I was told that's what you do, you join a group, you get a sponsor. Um, and so when I met this guy who I recognized from detox, I had talked to him for a few minutes, and I was like, he asked me how I was doing. I was like, really good. I was like curious about the steps, and I had asked this guy to take me through the steps, and this other guy in the other fellowship had suggested that I not really worry about the steps just yet. I just the haze is still lifting. Emotions are running high. He suggested that he typically doesn't take sponsees through the steps for at least a year. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this guy's my sponsor, and I'm supposed to believe him and trust him. And if that's like what he suggests, then I'll just go to meetings every day, and I'll feel the way that I feel right now. And hopefully things will get better. And so now here we are with this other gentleman that I had met that worked at the detox. And I asked him, I was like, well, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I work with a couple guys in the house, and I came through here, and I come back and I sponsor a couple guys here. And I asked him, I was like, how long do you usually wait with your sponsees? How long do you usually suggest they wait before they start doing the steps? And he's like, I tell them they should wait until they want to start feeling better. And I said, oh. I was like, will you be my sponsor? And he said, I thought you said you had one. And I said, well, I do, but he says I should wait a year. And he was like, all right, well, he didn't badmouth the guy. He didn't say that is crazy. You're going to die way before that ever happens. He didn't say any of that stuff. He just said, why don't you pray on it tonight and ask God for some guidance, and then why don't you call him tomorrow, and then why don't I give you my number, and we can talk after tomorrow night. I said, okay. So I did just that. I asked God for help, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't have a very concise conception of my higher power. I probably have less of a conception now, because it feels like it's always fluid and changing. But so I prayed, and I called my current sponsor in the other fellowship. I called him, and I explained to him what the situation was. Or actually, no, I had asked him if he wanted to go to a meeting, and he was like, oh, yeah, I actually don't go to that meeting anymore. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I was thinking about hitting up a meeting with this other guy that I saw from the detox, and he was saying that he usually doesn't wait very long to take people through the steps, um, and he's like, oh, well, maybe he should be your sponsor. And I said, okay, thanks. Like, I appreciate everything you did for me. And he didn't really do anything for me. I'd known him for like a week, and he asked him to be my sponsor, and that was it. But he kind of made the decision for me, and the other guy started sponsoring me, and we got to work right away. And he told me his job wasn't to be my taxi driver or my financial advisor or my therapist or my love counselor or any of that stuff. He said, my job is to take your hand and put it in the hand of God's, and to get you through the step work as fast as possible so you can start helping other people. I said, okay. And we started doing it. And the reason why my sobriety date isn't in 2009 is because we got to a pivotal point in the steps where I completely crumbled. I had lost my faith in my higher power, and I believe that the steps work perfectly in order, forwards and backwards. So we had gone to step 9, and I had signed up to, or we had made a plan to make an amends to my mom. It was the first time I was going to be back allowed into my parents' home. And it was Thanksgiving. So it was like November, and I had left in the very beginning of the year. So it had been a little while since I had been home. and I made a plan to make amends to my mother. And when I got there, I was too full of fear, obviously because I didn't have any faith in my higher power, and I had been dwelling on it, and I didn't do it because I was scared. And then to make the problem compoundly worse, I came back from that weekend, and my sponsor was really excited to see me and asked me how it went, and I told him it went fantastic. Um, I told him that my mom cried, I cried, we all cried, we hugged. It was a beautiful. It was just, you should have been there. And I can hear all of you laughing. Not really, but I can see all of you laughing. Anyway, so I continued on that way, and I relapsed very shortly after that. But I didn't tell anybody. I celebrated my 1 year. My whole family came out, like literally everybody. And my home group was not a small home group. It was Bridgewater, New Way of Life. It was like 200 people. We went out to fellowship hard afterwards. It was like 100 people that went out to dinner, and I felt like a piece of shit. I couldn't have felt smaller that night. And my mom was crying. She was so proud of me. It was the first time I'd seen my mom and my dad like in the same place in a really long time. It was terrible. It was terrible. And as I'm sure you can imagine, not long after that, I got caught living at the house with a random drug test. I ended up going right back to detox, right back to another halfway house. Got kicked out of that halfway house. Went to a sober house. Got kicked out of that sober house. Went back to the Cape, in like another area at the other end of the Cape in Falmouth. Was living there. Like, lost my job. Just like years of wreckage after that, until like eventually being sent to jail, getting out of jail 6 months later, and still not hitting my bottom. I still wanted to keep going. I still had some fight left in me, and and I called my like my best friend right when I had gotten out of jail. I'd walked to my aunt's house, who didn't live very far from where they drop you off, and I used her phone standing in her driveway, and I called my buddy, and I was like, there's like a 50-50 shot that I'm going to call him and he's either going to be sober or not. I was really hoping he wasn't. And I called him, and he picked up the phone, and he's like, dude, he's like, where are you? I was like, I'm at my aunt's house in Sandwich. He was like, I heard you were getting out soon. Um, he's like, I'm just leaving the 5 o'clock meeting in New Orleans. I'll come pick you up right now. And I was pretty disappointed, but I was like, all right, I guess I'm getting sober again. And I'd never tried to get sober where I live at home. I always thought like this place was the worst place for me. And I came back here, and I lived in his basement for like 2 years, and I had a lot of legal stuff hanging over my head, none of which was enough of a motivator to keep me sober, because I still, like, a 2-year suspended jail sentence hanging over my head, probation, um, random drug tests all the time. None of those things stopped me, because I still continued after I got out of jail, even though, I was kind of under the microscope of him and his family, and who only ever wanted the best for me. And I still managed to sneak out and mess up a few more times after that. My last relapse that happened February 18th of 2013, I had like 6 months. I had everything going for me. I had a sponsor. I was writing my fourth step again. Sean had just dragged me to our state conference. I had a girlfriend who I had met at Ikipa, the conference that I just got done with. I had just started bidding. I was like the program chair with like a couple months sober for the first year that I bid on that conference. And it was just like any other day. It was no different than any other day that I had. And I thought I was good. And the guy I was working with told me that he was going to get something to drink and asked me if I wanted to come. And I said yes. And we had like plenty of time to think about it. I had like an hour. to mull it over. I had an hour to call all the guys in my network that I built up. I had an hour to call my sponsor. I had an hour to pray on it. I didn't even think about it. I did not think about it once. I had made up my mind, and that's what I was going to do, and that's what I did. And it didn't do anything for me. It did absolutely nothing. Every other time I got sober, it was because I had to. I was either kicked out, locked up, like stipulated, whatever it was. I was being forced to. I was between a rock and a hard place. I had to. This day I drank, it didn't do anything. The next day I got a 24-hour trip, and I called my sponsor and I told him, and I'm sorry. Um, anyway, so I went and got a 24-hour chip, and I told myself I wasn't going to get another chip until I got my 1-year medallion. I had a whole drawer full of chips that meant absolutely nothing to me. I didn't want a pat on the back for getting 30 days, 60 days, 90 days again when I had done it so many times. Um, I finished that 4th step, and I made an amends like a month later after busting through my steps with my sponsor. I had like 3 months sober, and my sponsor told me to start sponsoring guys, start raising my hand to be available. And that's what I did. And I started sponsoring guys, and I dove headfirst into doing service work at the group level and at the YPA committee level. And it's been a part of my life ever since. And, my life is completely different than the guy that I brought in back in 2009, and especially different than the guy that I brought in 2013. Like I could tell you about all the really amazing, and I know I'm like running short on time, but I could tell you about all like the amazing things that I have in my life, all the awesome material things that I have, all the awesome relationships, my wife, I have a kid, business, house, like all this stuff. But the most amazing thing that I have today is like when I call my mom, she doesn't say, "What do you need now?" Um, my little sister calls me just to talk, and I can be there for them, and I know that my family can sleep at night, knowing that they don't have to worry about if they're going to get a phone call or a knock at the door in the middle of the night. Um, that's like the best gift. And then to watch the newcomer come in with the same look that I had on my face, and and watch the light come back. That's the best. That's the absolute best feeling. So I don't know. I've talked for long enough. I'd love to hear from you guys. So thank you so much for letting me share. It's been an honor.